My name is Tawfiq Haddad. I'm the director of the Kenyan Institute, which is the Council for British Research in the Levant's Jerusalem branch. Let's wait just a little moment before we actually start this. We're waiting for attendance to pick up, but maybe we take advantage of the situation to provide some background and notes on what we're about to see. The webinar that we are about to host is entitled Eastern Christianity in Syria and Palestine and European Cultural Diplomacy from 1860 to 1948, A Connected History. This webinar has people joining it from all over the world today. We had over 160 different people sign up for this. Hopefully, most of those can attend today. The Council for British Research in the Levant is an independent UK research charity and membership organization that exists to conduct, support, and promote humanities and social science research on the Levant. And we are part of the British Academy's one of 7 different British International Research Institutes that works, that have been around for more than 100 years, many of them, including our own organization. I'm speaking to you from the Kenyan Institute, which used to be the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem. That was consolidated together with the British Institute in Amman under the aegis of the Council of British Research in the Levant today. So we have 2 different local research organizations, one in Jerusalem, the Kenyan Institute, and the British Institute in Amman. In normal times, we organize a regular program of lectures in the UK and at our institutes, and we're very pleased to bring a new version of these events to you today in the form of this webinar. Now, we're very excited to have this event today, which is kind of a publicity event to raise attention to the latest edition of our one of our 2 journals called Contemporary Levant, in which the subject of Eastern Christianity in Syria and Palestine is being addressed. In a few moments, I will hand off to the chief editor, Dr. Sarah Irving, who will host today's event. But before I do that, I wanted to take advantage of the situation to say a few words about the situation in Jerusalem today, because it is impossible to actually not say anything about the situation in Jerusalem, and we could not simply act as though nothing is happening today in the city in which we work, in which we are directly affected. If I'm to be honest, there was a internal discussion in the organization whether we were actually going to continue with this webinar today, given the local circumstances. But we decided to move forward because we did not want to turn a blind, we wanted to continue our work and assert our work in East Jerusalem, as we have been doing for the past 100 years. But we also wanted to take the opportunity to say a few things about the situation here in Jerusalem, because it is all over the news, and we felt strongly that it was not a moment to be silent. The Kenyan Institute is located in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. It has been here for more than 50 years. We've acted as a hub for scholarly activity for UK and local scholars and the wider public in our vicinity, providing a forum for academic debate, independence of thought, and exchange of political, cultural, and religious boundaries throughout these years. Less than 150 meters from where this webinar is taking place, there are a lot of the political struggles which started the recent situation here in Jerusalem emerged. Namely, there are attempts to evict 4 different families in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood who have, these families have exhausted their legal appeals. These are 4 of upwards of 20 other families who have similar appeals. And this is not the first wave of evictions. It's worth noting that these families are refugee families living in United Nations built homes in the 50s together with the Jordanian government. Were this webinar to have taken place yesterday, it would have been a different scene. The streets of Jerusalem have been a mess. Demonstrations have been taking place almost on a daily basis, both day and night. The streets of Jerusalem smell of skunk water. The roads have been closed. Israeli special forces have been making arrests. Armed settlers have been walking through the neighborhood, and it has directly affected the work of the Kenyan Institute as well as that of its staff. Beyond these direct details, I think it's important to note that we, as academics, we are not politicians, but we are academics. And by saying that, we are in a unique position, both as academics located in Sheikh Jarrah, to have been observers and analysts of the situation for a long time, witnessing the incremental deterioration of the situation in Jerusalem and in this neighborhood in particular. We feel it's important to state that to issue a call that the situation has become in many respects intolerable, and that the larger model and approach of conflict management in the occupied territories today has proven itself no longer sustainable, and there's a need for a fresh look at the situation, which introduces the basic principles of human rights and international law here. That is formerly my position as the director of the Kenyan Institute. The Council for British Research in the Levant intends to issue a statement in the next 24 hours around these events. We did not want to be part of the occasional accusation that academics exist in their ivory tower. To not say something in a moment like this is also to say something. So let this be somewhat of a clarion call to raise attention for the need for addressing the situation here in a just and equitable manner. That concludes what I wanted to say about the situation in Jerusalem. I would like to hand off soon enough to Sarah Irving, Dr. Sarah Irving, who will take over the webinar. But before I do so, I'll just put out a few notes. This is a Zoom webinar. We ask you to put your questions in the question and answer function at the bottom of your screens. Today's event is actually being remarkably conducted across 6 different countries today. Holland, Paris, Greece, London, Cyprus, and the occupied territories. I feel I might have left one out, but that's all right. I'll leave it to Sarah to actually do the formal introductions about the webinar, and I'll come in at the end to sign off. Check us out though at our website, www.cbrl.ac.uk. Sign up for more webinars and check out what we're doing. Thank you. Take it away, Sarah.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for attending. Thank you particularly to Tawfiq for those words. We're here specifically to discuss and to present the newest issue of Contemporary Levant. I'm the editor of the journal. We will be speaking to the 2 editors of the special issue itself and two of the people who have contributed fascinating papers to this very rich, informative and valuable collection of articles. I think it is also, though, worth bearing in mind that although sometimes, as Tawfiq mentioned, there is the accusation that academia and academic articles are an ivory tower, one of the things that I think is most fascinating and exciting about this particular issue of the journal is the huge range of places from which it draws work, the huge range of archives in different languages on which the authors draw, and the way in which it enriches and adds granularity to our understanding of the Levant region, its place in geopolitics at one extreme of the whole region, and the way in which various imperialisms and colonialisms have impacted on it for over 200 years, and also the ways in which some of the papers in the collection, also at the kind of other extreme of the focus, look to the micro scale experiences of individual people from Palestine and other parts of the Levant region, and their experiences of being within the different layers of cultural, social, economic, political, historical change that they experienced. The name of the special issue is Eastern Christianity in Syria and Palestine and European Cultural Diplomacy, 1860 to 1948. It's the editorial of the issue is available open access on the journal's website on Taylor and Francis. So that's available to download for anybody. If anybody else has problems accessing articles from the journal, you're more than welcome to contact me on the Contemporary Levant email address, and I will try and help with that. In terms of how the seminar is going to run for the next half an hour or so, each of the four speakers will be talking for around 5 minutes each, just to give an impression of the main themes that they want to draw out about their papers. I will introduce each of them as they speak, and then we will take questions after all four of these kind of mini talks. As Tawfiq mentioned, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and Sophia and myself will collect them up, and if there are some that, for instance, speak to similar themes, then we may bunch them together. But yes, if you could use the Q&A function, we'd be very grateful. I won't be reading out full-length biographies of all of the speakers. I will just be giving you a little bit of an idea of who they are and what their profile is. I will post the link for all of the full biographies in the chat. And I will also probably post some other links in the chat as we go along. So do keep an eye on that for more information on some of our speakers and their publications. So having said all that, we'll be starting off with one of the two editors of this special issue, Dr. Karen Sanchez-Samara, who is an associate professor at Leiden University. She's also the principal investigator of the project Crossroads, European Cultural Diplomacy and Arab Christians in Mandate Palestine, A Connected History, 1920 to 1950. And this special issue comes out of this project and her wider work, particularly around the social and cultural histories of Christian populations in the mandates, both Anglophone and Francophone. Dr. Sanchez is the author and editor of a vast list of publications, so I'm not going to read them all out, but what I am going to do is post links to two of the most recent. These are edited collections, the first entitled European Cultural Diplomacy and Arabs Christians in Palestine, 1918 to 1948, Between Contention and Connection. And the second is not quite out yet, but will be soon, and that's Imaging and Imagining Palestine, Photography, Modernity in the Biblical Lens, 1918 to 1948. Both of these books are completely open access, which means that they are free to download either by chapter or by full book as a PDF. So do avail yourselves of that opportunity using the links that I'll be putting up. While I'm doing that, Karen, please take it away.
Thank you very much for the special issue, the hard work, and the adventure during the pandemic that it represented. Our intention was to tell the story of Palestine and Syria in transition, adopting a micro-global historical approach. And I think that's important to know, because we noticed, coming from very various backgrounds, that some studies in several languages, among them Greek, Russian, Arabic, were missing on Palestine. And these archival gaps needed also to be filled. So this is how we started. As Sarah mentioned, it's part of the Crossroad project. We were about to finish imagining Palestine. We had been working on photography, and we absolutely wanted to cover more Melkite population of Palestine and Syria. And it all started with few archives we encountered. So I will just say a few words about our methodology, the type of archives and the type of approach we adopted before I leave the floor to Kostas to tell you more about the different papers. We wanted to show via this cultural approach all the processes of appropriation, domination, cooperation at different level. This was very clear for us from the very beginning that we needed an approach playing between micro, meso, institutional level, and macro to get this mechanism of change in the cultural lives of Palestine and Syria. This was very much also our idea when we went and we all spent time either in Greece or in Russia or in Jerusalem and Palestine. We wanted to fill some of the archival main gaps in the sense that we had the impression local archives were underrepresented because also a problem of access. So the conference never took place in Thessaloniki due to COVID, but we wanted to show the broader connection. And we started to work online with colleagues from Greece, Russia, Austria, and the idea to show the broader connection of this Palestinian and Syrian population quickly appeared. Why that? The idea was to de-provincialize the Palestinian history and to offer keys about this very local event and history to be understood with more background to navigate at a different scale. If we take, for example, the Armenian compound and the change due to the genocide, we quickly saw with Raymond Kevorkian, who did the article on Armenian refugees and orphans in Jerusalem at that time, that you see all the scales and the impacts in Jerusalem, in the city itself, and on the different type of communities. Later on, we also wanted to cover the different layers of identification actors were having at that time through this cultural lens. Why? I would say extremely quickly, this idea of dialogue, wielding power through cultural lenses via the practices, the idea, come with the idea that we need to understand the notion of exchange, influence, and the working of such cultural and religious crossroads that were sometimes encounters do or do not sometimes take place, request from us that we are aware of processes of subversions. So to reveal unknown episodes and the agencies were one of our most present, I would say, motivation for the special issue. Why this period and why this idea to de-provincialize? We had previously in the volume you see in the question and answer, noticed the mobility of these cultural ideas, the increased literacy of people at that time, spread of new media and the different impact on language agenda. So we included our project in this transnational idea of grasping what was going on between these two regions. I will finish saying that this idea of influence in Palestine on these, mainly in this special issue, Melkite, Orthodox and Syriac population, and the power levered by these cultural influences on both sides has been always approached via a comparative approach. That's extremely important. So these communities within the society of that time, their Muslim and their Jewish peers, and also connected in the sense that even if one article was based, like Dimitrios, in Greek archives, we did exchange on the type of archives covering the same topic and questions to see if we could grasp the whole idea of these moments of connections. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We'll now hear from the other editor of the special issue of the journal. Konstantinos Papastathis is Assistant Professor at the Department of Political Science at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. He also participates in the Crossroads project at Leiden University, along with Karen, and his main scientific interests involve the fields of politics, religion, and Middle Eastern studies. As I mentioned, you can read his more full biography, including links to a number of articles on the link that I put into the chat field. Kostas, please.
Well, thank you, Sarah. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event for giving us the opportunity to present our work, as well as, of course, the Journal Contemporary event. I will present, I will say some words actually for the special issue, and then I will speak about my contribution. The special issue contains papers concerning the Eastern and Oriental Christianity, particularly the Greek Orthodox, the Syriac, the Armenian, and the Melkite Church of Syria and Palestine. Sarah Irving, Dimitris Kontogiorgis, Laura Gerd, Sotiris Roussos, Maria Litina, Angelos Dalachanis, Sadia Xous, Raymond Kevorkian, and Berhard Kroneger have contributed to this special issue, and myself have contributed to this special issue. In particular, Maria Litina has written a paper on follows the career of the Greek Orthodox Patriarch Cyril II in late 19th century or mid 19th century, and his dethronement, his deposition from his see due to his support to the Bulgarian Exarchate. It's very interesting because it is also related to the Arab Orthodox cause to have a say, to participate in the administration of the Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. Then the second contribution is by Sadia Xous, who studies the relationship between the Russian missionary educational enterprise in Palestine, and the leaders of the Arab Nahda. So it is very interesting because the author based her work on Palestine archival sources, and this is extremely important because, as far as I know, there are no contributions papers on the Palestine perspective of this of the Russian educational enterprise. Laura Gert and Dimitris Kontogioros will speak about their papers. Of course, Sotiris Roussos has contributed a chapter on the survival strategies, as he called it, which were developed by various Christian communities after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And he proposes that actually these were 5, and he describes the development, the historical development of these survival strategies, and whether their application and whether these were effective or not. Bernhard Kronegger deals with the Melkite Church during the colonial period, and putting emphasis on the debate between the Latinization and the Arabization of the community. So his paper focuses on the intervention by the Holy See in the Melkite Church in Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. This is an important contribution because it provides new insights about the relation of the Holy See and the Melkite Church, and within the context, within the historical context of the colonization period. Valachanis Angelos examines his paper is not so much related to Christianity, but directly at least, but he examines the history of the Greek Ladies Club of Jerusalem in late Mandate period, and he has worked on archives of the community, which is very important, and he examines the social activities and the cultural activities of this club, and its relation to the Patriarchate as well, whether there existed a relation with the Orthodox Patriarchate, as well as its relation to the Arab Orthodox community in Jerusalem. Last but not least, Sarah Irving wrote a paper on the Syriac Orthodox community, and in relation to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and she examines the ways in which the parts they played were informed by their status as Christians and in late Mandate period. Maybe she could also say a few words about her paper, because probably she will describe and give a better answer than myself. As far as I am concerned, my paper deals with the Jerusalem Orthodox Patriarchate within the period, within the transition period from the Ottoman rule to the British Mandate. Particularly, I attempt to describe the patriarchal crisis within 1917 to 1918, when a group of Orthodox monks, of Orthodox prelates, attempted to depose Patriarch Damianos from his see. I use primary archival sources from the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Public Record Office, and the Jerusalem Orthodox Patriarchate. I consider this controversy to be not only religious, but basically social and political. That's why my primary research aim is to explore the interaction between the various political and religious agents, which of course had conflicting agendas and strategic aims. I don't know if I have much time to speak about my paper, so I will just say a few words about the conclusion, namely that I consider this crisis, which ended with the win of Patriarch Damianos, namely that the British mandatory authorities did not recognize the deposition of Damianos, and this was their decision was based on the need to have to cultivate positive relations with the Arab Orthodox congregation, which supported actually Damianos, and that was one reason. The second reason was because the British would never allow the Greek intervention into the Patriarchate, of the Greek state, because that would be a pretext for the French to maintain their religious protectorate over the Catholics, which a state of affairs which was unacceptable for the British. Last, and I finish, I consider this crisis of 1917-1918 the starting point of the contemporary history, of the modern history of the Patriarchate, which has three main features, namely the subordination of the Patriarchate by state authorities, the Jordanian and then the Israelis, the British, the Jordanian and then the Israelis. The second feature is that its strategy, its finances were based on not on investing but on selling or leasing the vast real estate of the Patriarchate in Palestine, and especially within in Jerusalem, within and outside the walls, which is of course very important for what's happening currently in Jerusalem. And third, the third feature is that the continuous controversy between the Arab Orthodox congregation with the Greek establishment, which dominates the religious institution, a dominance, of course, which is viewed by the Arab Orthodox as a type of cultural imperialism. And I stop here. So sorry for for taking so much time to.
Thank you, Kostas, and thank you for giving a run through of all of the other papers in the issue. So now we will hear from two of the contributors to the issue, other of course than Kostas with his own paper as well. Firstly, we'll hear from Laura Gerd, who is a chief researcher at the St. Petersburg Institute of History, part of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Her research is focused on Russian policy in the Christian East, the ecclesiastical means of soft power in the Ottoman Empire, and the role of Russia in the competition between the great powers in the Eastern question. Laura.
Good afternoon to everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this session and the editors of Contemporary Levant, Karen and Kostas and Sarah. I'm really happy to take part in this event, which was expected for a long time, in fact, and unfortunately delayed so many times. I'm representing the Russian side of the project, and in fact, my article is just a presentation of a big program which we carry out together with Moscow colleagues, working on the archival sources on the Russian policy in the Christian East. And our research is already for many years in the Russian policy in the Balkans, in Greece, in the Patriarchates of Constantinople, of Alexandria, and the last 3 years in Antiochia, Patriarchate of Antiochia, so it's Syria. In fact, the main target of this work is, first of all, to represent the archives, which are not very well known, though they are absolutely available during the last 30 years at least. Probably the reason is not the unavailability, but just the language, because very often we can hear from colleagues that, yes, we would like to work in your archives, but we don't understand Russian and so on. Well, so our target is to find out what we have, to systematize it, and to make editions. And a couple of years ago, we edited a volume on the Russian policy in the Patriarchate of Alexandria, and now we're preparing maybe 2 volumes on the Patriarchate of Antiochia. The Russian policy in Syria started actively since maybe later than of the other great powers in the end of the 1830s. And the activities are related to one prominent name of Bishop Porphyry Uspensky, who traveled in Syria in the 1840s. And he was the first to bring information and to create a conception of the Russian ecclesiastical policy and the means of this policy, the ecclesiastical lever as political force, as soft power in Syria and Palestine. Later, he became the chief of the first Russian ecclesiastical mission in Jerusalem, which worked till the Crimean War, till 1853. The second half of the 19th century brought new events, and here we should underline, of course, the affair of the Melkite community who were ready to enter Orthodoxy with Russian help. After a lot of other directions of policy, and very important is the creation of the Orthodox Palestine Society, which started actively working since its organization in 1882. Today we already heard the colleagues mentioned the activities in the educational sphere, because the Palestine Society created a whole network of schools. About 10,000, 11,000 children studied in these Arab primary schools. Till the First World War, they were very active and financed, of course, by Russia. What is important to understand, what was the difference and what was the common features between this policy of Russia and the policies of the concurrents of England and Great Britain and France. Whether Russia was strong enough to counterattack the policy of the competitors. What is the big difference, of course, is that the Russian policy stopped completely with the First World War, and after the First World War, another period came, and with completely different targets. And though some methods remained the same, but the accents were, of course, different. That is why my research ends with the First World War and with the Russian Revolution of 1917, though some traces can be, some lines can be traced after the fall of Tsarist Russia. As I'm limited by time, thank you very much, and I would be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Laura. And yeah, as Kostas mentioned before, in terms of the other articles, there is a fascinating pairing in terms of particularly the question of Russian influence, where we have Laura coming from the Russian archives and looking at the question in terms of diplomacy and politics from the Russian end and how it's seen from the Russian archives. And then Sadia Aksus's article, which looks at some of the Palestinian products of Russian missionary education and the way that Palestinians experienced and made use of the education that they received in some of these various institutions that the Russian Empire paid for across the Levantine part of the Ottoman Empire. So finally, we have Dimitrios Kontogeorgis, who is a lecturer in modern Greek history at the University of Cyprus in Nicosia. His research interests and copious publications lie in modern Greek, Balkan and Mediterranean political and social history, the history of diaspora and migration, and the economic and social history of Greece and Southeastern Europe, in particular during the 18th and 19th centuries. Dimitrios, please.
Thank you very much. I would like firstly to thank the organizing committee, Karen, Kostas and Sarah, for the opportunity to participate in the special issue of Contemporary Levant and in this webinar. I'm very glad that it takes place because it is a wonderful occasion for us to discuss about subjects that I believe interest us all, and they reveal a more complicated and tangled history of the Levant, including Muslims, Jews, Christians, which can allow us move further from sectarian concepts and narratives. Now, some thoughts about my contribution to the volume, which I believe is probably the most, let's say, the one that deals with the oldest period, the early 1840s until the 60s. The title is The Greek Discovery of Syria, the 1860 Civil War in Lebanon and Damascus, and Greek Public Opinion. I tried to explore in this article the image, or better the images, of the various ethnic, religious and linguistic groups of Greater Syria in Greece from the 1840s, 1830s, 1840s until 1860, concentrating on the 1860 Civil War. I approached the subject from three different viewpoints. That of the Greek consuls in Syria, of the members of the Greek government in Athens, and of the Greek press, mainly in Athens and Hermopolis, the country's main port at the time. What could be considered, I hope, as a novel contribution to the historiography of the on the relatively understudied 19th century relationship between Greeks and Syria is the sources used. To be more precise, I traced at the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs consular reports from Syria of that period, which had been rarely or not at all used by historians up to now, with some notable exceptions, mainly Maria Litina, about the 19th century, Kostas Papastathis and Angelos Dalahanis, mainly about Palestine and the 20th century. This material owes its existence to the very dense consular network of that the Greek government established in the region after the foundation of the independent Greek state in the early 1830s, already since 1834, a consulate at Beirut, a consular agency at Damascus, at Tripoli, and elsewhere. Secondly, Greeks had forged already traditionally strong ties with the region, due both to the presence of Greek and Greek-speaking Orthodox clerics of the Patriarchate of Antioch, and also the merchants residing in the port. What I believe is unique in the perspective of the sources I examined is that it comes from a state that 30 years earlier was part of the Ottoman Empire, from a state which found itself on the geographical boundary between the West and the East, Europe and the Levant, a state which had formulated in the second third of the 19th century an ideology based on irredentism, the liberation of the unredeemed brothers, the so-called great idea, Megali Idea, but also espousing a very ambitious and fluid mission to act as a bearer of civilization, of European civilization in the East. It is tempting to see in the various reports of the consuls where they stress their duty towards the locals, a Greek equivalent of mission civilisatrice, and may be fruitful to compare the Greek activity with the one of other foreign missions. Moreover, despite the traditional religious ties, the viewpoint of the consuls is secular, earnestly secular. Residing there, the consuls' knowledge and understanding of the indigenous population was certainly broader, much broader, and often more profound than those of the politicians in Athens and the journalists of Greece, with a few exceptions. Yet they would at times yield to the simplistic categories of religious sectarianism. One can detect in their approach Orientalistic influences, traced in the depiction of Syria and Syrians as barbarians, non-civilized, and immoral. The Greek government, however, did not seem to appreciate the significance of their analysis. This is something I wanted to show on my paper. Syria was too far off to inspire serious concern, and the popular generalization of an incessant struggle of Muslims against Christians sufficed for the needs of her policy in the region. In any case, the main enemy for the Greek government were basically not the Druzes of Mount Lebanon or the different Muslim or Christian sects of the region, but the Ottoman Empire. The Greek press followed suit with a vengeance, I could say. The bottom line of the numerous articles on the massacres was that a bloodthirsty Ottoman Empire threatened the Christian brothers in the East, and Greeks, as the bearers of civilization, were there to offer help and guidance. And this was at the root of the Greek response to the civil war. In Lebanon, mainly the Greek humanitarian intervention with the dispatch of warships and the relocation of refugees in Greece. Of course, an archive has also gaps and blind spots, and it hides as much as it reveals. The documents from the 1830s, 1860s at the Diplomatic and Historical Archive of the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs include mainly consular reports, the correspondence with the local authorities, usually in French, letters of clergymen, mostly of bishops, in particular of the Jerusalem Patriarchate, and relatively few letters or petitions from the laity. The latter, despite being written in Greek and/or French, are an interesting source, nevertheless, since they reveal the aspirations of a part of the local population and can complement or even undermine notions and ideas expressed in the consular reports. I could say that they reveal the local population as having agency and not as passive victims of the circumstances. And last but not least, because I understand this webinar can give us information and data on the resources concerning Syria in Greek archives, I would just like to add that the Foreign Ministry Historical and Diplomatic Archive includes also interesting material concerning other matters relative to the Levant. For example, the often fraught relationship between the Patriarchate of Antioch and the Greco-Catholics of Halep and Aleppo, especially during the 1860s and 1870s, and an effort by at least a group of the Melkites to rejoin the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate. I suppose this has been also analyzed by Laura Gerd. And we can also discover data on the organization of the Greek school, Greek Arabic school at Beirut, through letters and reports of the local consuls. And among other institutions in Greece, I would like to mention the Gennadios Library in Athens, which holds an interesting collection named after Hadji Pan Theodosiou, a Greek merchant in Constantinople, Istanbul, and containing letters from the Patriarchate of Antioch of the 1830s, concerning basically business transactions. And the National Historical Museum contains the correspondence, and this is an important archive, of the committee which was founded to aid the refugees from Beirut and Lebanon in the 1860s. Last but not least, relevant material is also to be found in the General State Archives of Greece, which holds a significant amount of consular records and other material from Beirut and Damascus. I think I'm okay with the time, so thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Demetrios. So yes, between Greek archives and Russian archives, if there's anybody in the audience looking for linguistically complex PhD or other research projects, there's plenty of exciting archives for you to think about. And I have to say, after I attended a conference in Armenia a few years ago, I've been firmly convinced that one of the things that Anglophone Middle Eastern studies is hugely lacking is people who can work on Russian archives material and speak on a much more equal level with Russian researchers. I guess, given the state of humanities funding, maybe this is a bad time to call for that kind of thing, but certainly something we need to keep on fighting on, as well as, of course, the importance of regional languages in studying the Middle East. Thank you very much to all of the speakers. We already have some very interesting questions. I'm just going to acknowledge a couple of nice hellos and expressions of solidarity from Renee Hatta in Amman and Gabriel Polly. And then to go straight into the questions, I think this is one which I think any of the speakers might like to answer if they feel they've got things that they can pull out from their archive experience. But so this is from Roxana Maria Arras. My question is connected to the nature of the archives consulted and to their methodological potential. I was wondering if these archives afford the construction of multisensorial historical narratives on Arab Christians, ones that take into consideration sound, taste, and the olfactory materiality. I rely here on Ziad Fahmi's call to create more sound historical narratives on the past. So speakers, taste, sound, smell, sensory elements to your archives. Does anything spring to mind?
If I may, in fact, we are looking at all the perplexity of archive sources, and we have different kind of sources. We have diaries, journals, correspondence, and even in the official reports of the diplomatic representatives, there are so many details on the life of the Orient and on the relations with different groups of populations and so on. One example, during the last maybe already 15 years, where editing volume by volume the journals of Antonin Kapustin, who was the chief of the Russian Church, first in Athens during 10 years, after in Constantinople during 5 years, and after for 30 years in Jerusalem. And day by day he was writing with whom he met, what he was speaking, what he was eating, what impressions of life he had. Of course, it's a very personal source, and all these personal sources, we should look at them through double glasses because you understand, as well as at all others, of course. but the tendencies we can smell, we really can smell the flavor of the streets of the towns where he walked and see, look, we can, in fact, films may be made after these sources. It's one of my ideas for my retirement. But the sources are very different. The Russian sources, well, the Russian archives, their volume is maybe compared with the National Archives in Kew Gardens. When I came first time to Kew Gardens, I felt myself as if I am in the archive of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Moscow, because it's the same volumes on Turkey, on different consulates, embassies of, all archives of the former great powers. In France is the same, and in Vienna the same, of course, in the archives of the Vatican. They are so big and so different. You should just dig there, and concerning the methodology, well, methodology is a very general word, of course, but of course, first of all, we should make a classification, and it's already made by our predecessors. But anyway, in any kind of archives, we can find a lot about everyday life, of course. Thank you.
I just wanted to add something, maybe. The sound power, because we were just looking into this cultural influence and diplomacy idea, was a chapter of the book with Palgrave on exactly what Laura explained from the Catholic side. So sometimes this material history was not at the center because we started with a desire and we were obsessed by, you know, Trouillot silencing the past we couldn't find. And suddenly you are not looking for it and you are in Sainte-Anne and you encounter a bunch of archive of the fanfare from Sainte-Anne, which apparently might be very Franco-French. And then you cross-analyze with the Franciscan archives and then some memoir. So in this material history, at least at our very humble level, for the moment, the sound history was much easier than the smell, for example, because it was not at the heart of our research. The last thing I wanted to say is we have to tackle the fact that we need to counter the fact that many archives disappeared in 1948. So the very last example I found for sound, for example, when you have names of people who rented houses in new neighborhood before 1948, and you realize that they write in some of private memoir that they were listening to this type of Austrian, let's say, classical music from 1938, then you can trace another type of sound history, because you see they have been listening to the same music, Jews, Palestinians together, sometimes very punctually sharing their love for some of the classical music. Olfactory, I will answer later about a French researcher because of the time.
I think it's quite good to have gotten a whole hour through without speaking while muted. I think that's progress. So I just want to add into this question of archives another question from Konstantinos Politis. You've mentioned Greek and Russian archives, but aren't the Ottoman Turkish archives at least as relevant, if not vital, for understanding the late 19th to early 20th century Syrian Palestinian socio-political situation? Long sentence. Does anybody want to comment on that aspect of the archival question here?
Just to make a comment, if I may. Well, obviously, the local archives, whether written in Arabic or Ottoman are very important, and I think this is something that we know from many decades of research in Middle Eastern studies. But to be honest, at least for me, it's pretty obviously that I cannot tackle with this material, and so because there are so many archives in many languages, this sort of interaction and cooperation and dialogue is so important. Not everybody can tackle with every source available. I think that it's obvious. Thank you.
I could add to that, Sarah, from, sorry.
Yeah, and yeah, Kostas, and yeah, maybe because he's been waiting a little while.
No, it's okay. Well, thank you. Sorry, Karen. I just wanted to add to what Dimitrios just said, that the Ottoman archives, of course, they are extremely useful for our work. However, these are official documents, so we can read the decision of the Sublime Porte concerning the question of the Greek-Arab Orthodox controversy, or we can read the Berat of a patriarch, or the regulations of the Melkite or the Orthodox Patriarchy. The archives of the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or the archive, a religious archive, such as the Patriarchate of Constantinople or the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, will give us more information about what's happening on the ground. Of course, the Ottoman archives are extremely important as far as the institutional, the legal aspect is concerned. The diplomatic archives are, as far as I'm concerned, important for the everyday politics, religious politics that took place in Jerusalem or Antioch.
Can I add a few stuff on the how we proceeded, you know, the behind the scene, this special issue? How do you tackle that? As editors, we contacted, for example, on the Ottoman archives, the center in Paris, Setobac. So my colleagues, you know, from there, to see, before inviting someone to write, like Dimitrios, when he applied, we thought, do we have something from an Ottoman perspective on this? And this was very interesting from a methodological point of view, because I personally also do not master Ottoman Turkish, and that's why I'm not a specialist of the 19th century. To hear from colleagues that this topic was not covered, at least from what they had seen in the catalog. So this is how we started to draw a map of this special issue, to be sure that we would cover some of the archival gap. And to answer to the question, to the comment of Michael Martin, hello, that is online, some of these, of course, were not destroyed, but lost, stolen, etc. in 48. And we conceived that as an opportunity to look further on other type of issues. For example, the conference we are preparing with Sarah on vocabularies of tourism, to see where we could progress from these archival gaps on others, covering neighborhood or a very specific topic we missed in this special issue. So I would say, if we look into the special issue, it's very much linked to previous work from Crossroad and the one to come, to try to cover, you know, like a puzzle on aspects.
we have a small list further down, if there are people who are particularly interested, of other Greek scholars who've worked on specifically the Ottoman archives. And just to wrap up this discussion of archives as a topic, we have this comment from Michael Martin that I think many of us would endorse, the idea that we need to be bold enough, also bearing in mind Tawfiq's comments at the start of this session, that some archives are not lost, they are stolen, they are looted, and that access to them is controlled or denied for reasons that I think we're all largely aware of. Okay, so going back to some of the earlier questions, I think to some extent, Karen, Dimitrios and Kostas, you get to have a little break now because we have lots of interest in Russia. So to start off with, so Laura, I hope you're all ready to go. Start off with, I think to some extent this was already answered, but from Fadi Abudib, is the absence of Russian schools in the Levant today compared with American, British, French, etc., related to the collapse of the old regime in Russia? And then Fadi goes on to mention some of the Arab Nahda leaders who were educated particularly in the Russian school at Nazareth, and that's what Sadia Agzous's article goes much more deeply into, and some of her other work. So there's that little question about schools, Laura. Two questions to you then from Luke Yeske. What distinguished Russian policy in Antioch? How was it different from policy in the patriarchs of Jerusalem, Alexandria, or Constantinople? Do you see the IPPO, and if you wouldn't mind telling the rest of us what that is, because I don't think everybody in the audience is going to know, an extension of Russian state policy, or did it pursue its own goals? And then much further down from Carol Palmer, a question about the Russian Orthodox Missions School for girls and young women in Beit Jala. I understand that the Russian mission was the first to educate girls and young women, training them as village teachers. Is this true? I guess this is in comparison with missions from Britain, France, etc. Is it possible to say more about this Beit Jala school and its background and the impact on the young women who were trained there?
Thank you very much for the questions. I will start with the first one. Of course, all the activities of the Russian philanthropic and ecclesiastical institutions in the Near East and the Middle East was stopped with the Russian Revolution and the collapse of the old regime, because the Soviet state completely rejected all old levels of influence, and first of all the ecclesiastical one. Maybe methodologically, but just on a structural level, the communist idea replaced in partly the Orthodox idea in Russian policy during the Soviet period. But this is just a suggestion, it's not the topic of my research. Anyway, of course, all Russian schools were closed soon after. Well, they survived during the first years of the First World War, but as they were completely financed by from Russia, they couldn't survive for years. And there is a huge correspondence in the archives on this topic, and we see that by 1915 they already struggle for survival, and finally they. One by one they were closed in 1 or 2 years later, and stopped their existence. Of course, there were many people who studied in these schools, and in the beginning of the 90s, when people from Russia first came to Palestine, to Syria, they still met old people who were started their studies in these Russian schools. And many famous people, of course, and Sadia Agzous studied this side of the topic. The second question to Luke Yeske. Well, of course, it's a big issue, what distinguished Russian policy in Antioch. In general, the policy in all patriarchates had the common feature that the general idea was to support orthodoxy against Catholicism and Protestantism. How to support it? This was the difficulty because it was the dioceses of other churches. Russia couldn't interfere formally from point of canon law, couldn't interfere in the life of other patriarchates. And that's why the policy, the active policy was partly blocked. It met a lot of obstacles compared to the policy of the Catholics or the Protestants who acted in their inside their own institutions. Russia didn't have such institutions, and the Russian politicians, both ecclesiastical and civil, had to act via the patriarchates and to send, for example, money to the Greek patriarchs, and after to try to influence the distribution of this money. And could never trace whether this money is used for the purposes for what they were sent or not. What was the difference? In Jerusalem, the policy, of course, it is a separate and very special topic. But there were many things in common between the policy in Jerusalem and in Antioch, because it was a policy aimed at supporting the local Arab population and supported and trying for a long period, trying to cooperate with the Greek prelates, and finally trying to support the Arabs in electing their own bishops. And finally it was in Antioch where the Russians managed to support an Arab to become a patriarch in the end of the 19th century. Maybe this is the main difference, that it was the only Oriental See where the Russian policy had really a big success in rising an Arab patriarch on the Antiochian Sea. And during the last 14 years before the before the beginning of the First World War, Russia almost completely financed the Patriarchate of Antioch. I don't know to what percent exactly, but it was during the Gregory IV, for example, during his reign. There were huge sums of money which were sent directly from Russia to support Orthodoxy and to support the Patriarchate of Antioch. This was not the case with Jerusalem, and of course not the case of Constantinople and Alexandria. And the second one about the Palestinian Society. The Palestinian Society officially, it was a private organization, and it was not financed from the state budget. It was financed by personal private donations until 1912. And it has three main goals. The first was to support Russian pilgrims. The second, research work in Palestine, mainly history and archaeology. And the third, of course, the schools. But on the other hand, it was linked to Russian policy, and it served Russian policy. And the Tsar Nicholas II was a member of the Palestine Society, and many of the high officials and diplomatic figures. Being a private organization, at the same time, it served, of course, Russian political views. And one example for the Russian schools in Syria and Palestine, as they needed a lot of money, and the society was private. By 1910, it was a very big problem how to finance them. And at that time, there was a lack of financing, and the question was raised maybe to close most of them. And finally, a decision was taken already with the participation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that since that moment, the schools should receive governmental financing from the state budget, because their existence is so important for Russian policy in the East that this cannot be stopped. So they go both. And once I remember with Maria Litina, we were discussing whether Russian philanthropic activities and donating money for churches, for schools, and etc. Was it a philanthropic activity, or it was pure political one? It goes together. You cannot say that this is pure philanthropic, this is pure political. Of course, as everything in the Middle East goes together. Church goes together with politics. And all the diplomats, all the consuls in the East, they always stressed in every dispatch that we cannot separate politics from church affairs. Everything goes together. And of course, for Russia, the ecclesiastical policy with a strong level of influence of this so-called soft power. Britain and France had much more opportunities from military side, financial opportunities, and maybe the main weakness of Russian policy was that Russia couldn't invest so much money as France did in Syria. It was always the topic of discussion that, well, we have good research works on French policy in Syria, how much, what sums were invested in schools, in this Catholic proselytism and so on. Russia couldn't compete materially. This was the weak point. And all the time we see increasing budgets from France, from Britain, from Russia, which came both from private sources and from governmental sources.
So where does this school in Beit Jala
yes,
stay in this question?
To say the truth, the history of the schools, Russian schools in Syria and Palestine is only approached, but we don't have a serious fundamental research on the topic. Because the main archives are in Moscow, it is the fund of the Palestine Society, and it is only partly published, partly investigated. What I can say, yes, it was a seminary, so-called, there were two seminaries, one was in Nazareth for men and the other in Beit Jala for girls, for women, which prepared teachers for village schools, and local girls who studied there later became teachers. To present the whole history of this school, you should enter the archives again and study it page by page, folio by folio, and after we can reconstruct the history. Now we have fragments of this work, which is already done by our colleagues, but this is the future, in fact.
So that's an important future project for somebody.
Yes, in fact, it is a topic for maybe more than one doctor physicist to write the history of the educational enterprises, Russian educational enterprises in Syria and Palestine. Yes, interesting that of
I think we've lost Laura. Okay, I was just then going to ask, I think probably one final question to kind of pull together again the various strands of this issue. And I think from the perspective of both Dimitrios as a contributor and of the editors, I was wondering how you view the idea of cultural diplomacy as something that helps to clarify the kind of histories that you wanted to present in this issue, and perhaps in particular, how do you think using the idea of cultural diplomacy works when you're combining it with looking in particular at church histories. Karen or Kostas, perhaps first.
Kostas, do you go
Yes.
or should I go first? No?
Well, please, if
No, you first.
well, there are two babies here, so it's it might be better if you start. Anyway,
Okay. Like to?
I think I'm very sorry. I had a problem with the internet, but I hope you continued without me.
No problem at all.
Thank you.
A short answer. First of all, we are fully aware that the concept might look anachronical as it has been used, and we could dig into that after Second World War, and how can we apply that to earlier period. What it does, though, if you take the idea of exchange and all the variety of exchange via not only cultural agendas, policies, but also product, and the way cultural product via religious actors have been defined as being efficient and have been commented as being rejected or reappropriated and transformed, then the concept is interesting, at least to be questioned. And it brings not only the cultural aspect that is always missing in this political history or even intellectual history of Palestine of that time, but also I'm extremely tired, so the word is coming in French, sclérosé. So when you decompartmentalize this church history, where you used to have one specific approach of one community or a kind of hagiography, these cultural product object influences are binding together a more global approach of the impact on the identification process of population we wanted to analyze, whether they are from European countries at that time, or Russia, or local population. I can develop later. If Kostas cannot speak, then maybe now, Dimitrios, what is your view?
I would like to say that it's a very difficult subject, and the term cultural diplomacy, of course, was not used by the consuls in the 1840s, 1850s. For them, it was either a national or a philanthropic, let's say, mission. Well, there is an interesting material when they compare the schools, the Orthodox schools at Damascus and in Lebanon with the missionary schools. And for them, there you can see that they begin to understand the subject of a different culture coming in the Arabic lands. And for them, it's shocking because they are Orthodox, they are very proud to be Orthodox, and they can see that the Catholic schools are better, the Protestant academies are better, and so on. But the problem is, and this is the problem of the archive, that we rarely have the opinion of the locals. We have the opinion, the concepts, the ideology of the people who came from Athens and became their councils and so on. Even when we have material in Greek or in French from locals, from natives, usually they are clergy. And that's, we have to deal with them in different ways. I mean, first of all, they are written in Greek, but were they originally written in Greek? For some material, we know that it was not. because they say that it is a translation from the Arabic. But we do not have, of course, the Arabic manuscript and so on, original. And this is also a problem. And there is also a problem of conjecture. When they speak, these people, towards, they address the consular authorities, what is the discourse they advance, the terminology they use? For me, because it is just the beginning of a research, these are questions I need to deal with. But I think that reading and studying about cultural diplomacy and in the 20th century can be also revealing for the 19th century, though I must admit, now I'm not so sure how. I believe it will be revealing.
Thank you so much, Dimitrios. And I think that's an excellent way to end the discussion. Taufik, would you just like to close things on behalf of CBRL?
By all means, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our participants today in this discussion. It's been truly a fascinating discussion, and I look forward to reading the edition myself. Of course, that's an admission that I haven't done so myself yet, but it's certainly a very fascinating subject and with a lot of details, and I'm sure a lot of our audience members appreciated it. Throughout the course of this webinar, there've been, we topped out around 85 or 90 different people. So that's a great turnout for an event like this, especially in these busy times. So I'd like to thank everybody, especially the panelists and the special editors, and also our chief editor, Dr. Sarah Irving of Contemporary Levant. Thank you to our audience for participating and attending today, this webinar hosted by the Council for British Research in the Levant from Jerusalem. You can check out what we do on our website, www.cbrl.ac.uk. A video recording of this should be posted soon on our website, and you can also find previous different webinars that we've done here, as well as all the other activities that we do. Other than that, have a safe night, and thank you for attending. Take care.
Thank you.